the battle begin.
How are we doing, guys? Welcome to tonight's stream. We've had a few days with some internet difficulties, but we are finally back once again. And we have a special guest on stream tonight, guys. We have got DrGameology. Some of you will have known him in the past, in a past life, as Dr. Swarto. How are you doing today, Doc?
I'm doing great, Doc Sauce. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for agreeing to come on with us tonight. So we're gonna be having a bit of a general chit chat and a bit of discussion tonight around the mental health aspect of gaming, which I think sometimes has reared its head in the news. Am I the guest? Yeah, you caught me out there, Potato. You caught me out. But yeah, we're actually going to be touching a lot on the mental health element of gaming tonight, and we're going to be looking at both the pros and the cons of mental health around gaming in particular. We can look at various elements around that, so we can look at how gaming can influence the mindset. We're looking at how it may potentially contribute towards aggressive behaviours and negative mindsets, looking at the benefits as well, which, if I look at my own personal experiences over the last couple of years, gaming has definitely been a massive influence in keeping me even remotely sane in this world. But Doc, why don't you start with how you came about from the very beginning? Like, why did you want to major in psychology and medicinal sciences and practices? Was that something that you wanted to do from being young, or was it something that you were kind of pushed into later in life?
That's a really neat question to start with. So again, thanks for having me. I guess the place I would start is I remember in 4th or 5th grade really learning what a psychologist is. And people telling me, your grades are so good, or you have good ideas, or you're a good creative problem solver. So even as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, you have those messages sent to you repeatedly by the adults in your life, and you start to realize that, you know, you can't jump very high, run very fast. You're not going to be a professional basketball player.
Yeah.
You start realizing the odds of being an astronaut are not very good either. And so somewhere in that range of time, I guess I started looking at what I could actually do that fits into my abilities, my human abilities. And the grades just stayed up there, and you finish high school, and even in high school, I was doing the kinds of things that would be good setup for being a psychology major. You know, I was doing peer mediation, which was, you know, 2 students have a conflict and they bring in a peer to mediate the problem, and if the 2 people with their lunchroom fight or whatever can make a reasonable agreement, they can avoid getting expelled or suspended for a week. And so I was even doing that as a high school student, and it just kind of continued, and you figure out what's the next step from these things. And so I majored in psychology, and then I did my master's in counseling, and then I did my doctorate in counselor education and did my study on personality effects in motivations for playing Star Wars: The Old Republic, and got involved with UtiniCast and created a stream channel, and now we're here.
Did you always feel, as you started stepping into psychology, that was the right area for you? Did you look at any other areas of medicinal science before you came to psychology?
No. So psychology is what I majored in for my undergrad degree. But you always want to move into something more specific when you do your master's. And that could be clinical psychology. It could be, in my case, it was counseling. So I'm not a psychologist. My doctorate is a doctor of philosophy in counselor education. So I'm a licensed mental health counselor in 2 of the 50 United States.
Yeah.
And psychologists tend to be people who have gone through the doctorate of clinical psychology. So the classes are very similar, but the path is different. And so the difference for me is more connecting with human beings on their level and making plans with them to develop resilience, plan and have strategy for the obstacles in their life. And psychologists do much the same, but they may put a higher emphasis on assessment scores or creating reports and write-ups for court-related situations, or just, that documentation is different. It's not really that fun of a conversation topic, but so I'm not a psychologist. I'm a licensed counselor with the 2 states that I've lived in as an adult.
Okay, so what are your thoughts as far as the mental health element of gaming in general is concerned? Are you somebody who's quite wary around the negative elements of the gaming, or do you tend to focus mostly on the positives, or is it a bit of a mixture?
Sure. So I've been counseling people for a while now, probably coming up on 10 years in the field. And more than half of that, I've been a business owner, that I have my own practice where people find me, and if their problems specifically line up with my expertise, which is video games, gambling addiction, those kinds of things where addiction sort of symptoms come in the form of how we play things. So it's this corruption of something that's designed to be good for us into something that derails our journey on the path of our own life.
Yeah.
And that being said, I've made many conference presentations, written papers, and tried to be a voice in the community for games can be great things. They are not just something that creates problems in people's lives. And it really is up to the person to figure out what their path is in life, and if games can be a part of it, how big a part should this game be in order for me to still be on that path to be the best version of myself?
Yeah.
And if we're honest when we answer that question, games can be a force for powerful good in our lives and can connect us to people.
Definitely.
If we don't answer that question honestly, then bad things do happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very difficult for some people to find a suitable balance in their own mental wellness as well, where games are concerned. Um, you will find that if I use streaming as a prime example here, some people might only stream 2 hours at a time, 2 days a week, and that's fine. That's not a problem. That's the time that they want to offer to that community and to their hobby. But then equally, you're going to get people who will go to extremes of that. If I used my own stream stats as a prime example, there was a point earlier this year where I'd done 29 streams in 30 days and I'd hit 95 hours. Now, if I look back now to where I was at that point, I would have alarm bells ringing now. I'd be thinking, Duck, what the hell are you doing? 95 hours in 29 days, that's a little bit extreme. You need to take a break. But I think it's also worth bearing in mind the kind of reasons why people might want to input that amount of time into something.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Well, I did the math, and that's actually fewer than 4 hours a day.
yeah,
So that sounds like a lot, but I've done counseling sessions with people where we'll do a weekly report
yeah,
where I just have boxes and it's landscape. So it's like Sunday through Saturday and then vertical columns for the hours of the day. And we'll just chart out how do you calculate when you're playing? What actually happens when you sign into this game? And I've had weeks where the individual reports to me 100 hours in a 7 day span.
See, that's the thing though. This is adding on to my normal 10 hours a day plus looking after two children.
Yeah.
And it gets quite intensive, really. And, you know, understandable, yeah, you're going to burn out when you're doing that. And I think sometimes when you're trying to find a good medium, it takes somebody actually hitting an extreme like that before they kind of realise and take a step back and readdress it and look at, right, okay, yeah, 90 odd hours in 29 days might be a bit extreme, but what can I do to try and manage that while looking after my own mental wellness as well? And it's hard to try and find that balance sometimes. I mean, you come across people who have lost jobs because they're that addicted to gaming that they'll miss the
Yeah.
shifts in work and they'll go without pay, and then they're missing family events, they're missing family dinners, they're missing christenings and birthdays, and I've known people to even miss to just completely skip Christmas Day and just play games all day.
Yeah. And that can happen for a wide range of reasons, and it's different per person. There's that tunnel vision that happens
Yeah,
where you get into a goal, and
yeah,
no matter how many times you succeed or fail at that goal, you're grinding, to use that EXP game term, but time just fades into the background, and 9 p.m. becomes 4 a.m. and you might sleep for 90 minutes, but there's no way that 90 minutes is going to make you ready for a work day, and you're going to be tapped out by 10:30 a.m.
yeah,
So it's it's all based on the person, right? A person can play 8 hours on a particular day, and they're perfectly fine. There were no consequences or sacrifice to that decision. Whereas I could play 3 hours on a particular day, and that is a big mistake. Whereas other days, that 3 hours is just fine too.
yeah,
So it's all about understanding what it is that makes your day worthwhile
yeah.
for you, but also for the people depending on you. And if you can keep that balance intact, then again, games can be a great thing. You can experience fun, you can relax, you can have more people in your life. It can be a social magnet. Even this week, I had a session with a younger age young adult client, and I encouraged him to create a Discord server for his college classes that start next week, and just try to use the kinds of things we know about socialization in games to make friends in college. Um, just invite the class to these Discord servers and actually get to know people instead of sitting in front of the webcam
Yeah,
and letting all the social aspects of college get canceled, because I think that those are important parts of why we go and become more educated, is to connect with clubs, connect with people, develop. Some of my biggest friendships in life are people I met in college.
yeah.
And, that's part of the degree, that we can't just pretend it's all about grades and a piece of paper. Well,
It's
just like we can't pretend life is all about leaderboards and BioWare achievements either.
I mean, it's hard for people to try and find that balance of what they actually want to use a gaming community for, without it interfering in the personal life. It's very hard for people to do that. I have been very open over the duration of me streaming. I came out of an abusive relationship. Things were an absolute mess. Psychologically, mentally, emotionally, it broke me, and it took a long time to rebuild that. But at the very start of that relationship, I'd moved 30 miles away to where I am now, and that was a big thing for me then. But during that relationship, I had no social circles besides the people that I worked with. I never used to actually get to really socialise. I never used to get to go to the bar on a Friday night and have a few beers and relax with friends, play pool, go out drinking or whatever. And I never really used to get them kind of opportunities. So for me, my grandfather had actually died in the December of 2018 and had left some money for me, which I used to buy my equipment for my computer, and that's how I got into the streaming side of things. I'd always wanted to do it, and I'd saved up little bits here and there to actually go and get the items, but having a chunk of money there of, right, I can go and get it now, and I can really actually start to build a social circle. And to this day, the streaming is my social circle. It's my way of being able to go to a bar or a pub or whatever Sly wants to call it, on a Friday
Yeah.
night. And I can have a few beers at home. I can still talk with friends. I can still play games, and I can still have a laugh. But that's my equivalent in a way. So I've managed to take some good out of something bad, but the difficulty is trying to find that balance. When is it too much? When is it too little? And trying to overcome those hurdles that you get along the way. It's no different than what would happen with even some of the bigger streamers in Twitch. Dr. Disrespect, Asmongold, people like that as an example. They might be hitting 40 or 50 or 100,000 viewers, but they're going to have had that stage fright, or at least an online equivalent of stage fright at some point along the way. And it's hard to try and get over that hurdle. And I've said that to my community before. You can't expect me to be constantly chit-chatting every 5 minutes, and you're never going to get to shut me up. I'm going to have quiet periods, but that's because of that anxiety that stemmed from what has happened over the years. And that can come
Yeah.
on very sudden, and it's hard to try and actually get around that at times, but when you do, it's a lot better. But it's how we actually find coping mechanisms and how we can integrate that into our day-to-day life. I think gaming, especially over the last 10 years in particular, has probably become more prominently successful for people as a coping strategy than anything really has been, probably.
I was reading a article. I don't remember the website, but it was a couple days ago, and it said something like 3 or 4 billion people on the planet now play video games.
Yeah.
And someone in the comments was saying that, yeah, but the people who are just playing mobile games don't count, so it's actually around 500 million. And I thought to myself, based on what I've read in the research, that's really disingenuous, because even people who are playing games on their phone, they can relate to the process of a successful tone being a reinforcement mechanism. They can relate to, forming something like a guild to tackle a challenge together with people across their country that the server is connecting them into.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be this technical rotation boss mechanic kind of thing to say this is a video game but that isn't. I mean, we have so many benefits that we can find in all these different kinds of games, whether it's Final Fantasy 14 or Persona 5, which I just got done streaming many, many hours of. Whether it's a social online connected game or a solo
Yeah.
pursuit. And going to that anxiety concept, I don't, for me, I relate to that, but I wouldn't say that I have anxiety over what I'm going to say with my audience, but maybe that's because of the teacher persona that I have.
Yeah.
But what I experience is the first 5 times I stream a new game, I don't have that rhythm of how I'm going to talk with the audience with that new game being the focal point. So I added The Last of Us Part 2 to my stream on the day it launched. I'm not done with it yet, and I haven't been streaming it every day. I know it's a winding game that doesn't end when you think it's going to end, but it's so down in the dumps of human emotion,
Yeah.
and it's so quiet. And I think I've hit my rhythm now. If you look at my last 2 times streaming that game, it's much better because I know, like I added the Pretzel Rocks app to my Streamlabs, so now there's upbeat music that definitely doesn't belong in the game, but that little switch, it makes it so that now I'm connecting with my viewers better because the dread is broken that my character's feeling is I have something else that I can feel, even though we know my character has that tension and they're probably gonna get jumped and their face get eaten off. I don't feel that because I'm just hearing like the bouncing drum beat and the techno vibes and it's just interesting that opens it up for me to keep talking. Whereas if I'm just feeling the tension of the game, I am not thinking about like, oh, duck sauce, you see how many different countries your viewers which you were from. That's sorry, that's what the chat was talking about a few minutes ago. I thought it was hilarious. But, The Last of Us, without the music added to it, makes it so I am not in that space to talk about that. And it's just so interesting how games affect us, but how games with an audience affect us. And it's all just, there's so many variables. It's fascinating to open your mind to think about it.
Yeah. At what point would you say that mass input of hours in a game becomes a problem for somebody? Like I used my stats as an example earlier on, which yeah, fair enough, it's only about 3 or 4 hours a day over 29 days, but at what point would you say it becomes a problem for somebody? Where do you draw the line in terms of what is a short-term goal and what becomes a long-time problem?
Yeah, I'm going to actually invoke the essence of probably everyone knows this game, Tetris, okay? Yeah. Or any game where there's blocks falling and your job is to clear it out before the clutter hits the ceiling, right? So if you play that game on a calming low difficulty and you generally understand the strategy, you'll be fine. You can play it almost infinitely.
Yeah.
And that's our life when everything is flowing the right way. The games, our job, our marriage or our friendships, parenthood, our vacations, our relaxation time. It's all in balance. It's in harmony. The point where games can become a problem is when the blocks start falling so fast you can't clear them. So if I have time to play 2 hours of video games today,
yeah,
and then, for me as an example, teach my classes, grade my papers, at least a quarter of the papers that came in this week, counsel the people I need to counsel, and show up for the lectures that I need to deliver in the late afternoon, evening time.
Yeah.
And I do all of those things just right, then I can play those 2 hours. But some days I don't have those 2 hours. And if I give those 2 hours to the video game, even though I don't have them, well, now we have a problem because Now my grading is less reliable. The attention to detail is diminished. Maybe my PowerPoints are not done for my class in time. So a couple of the slides are subpar. Um, maybe I forget to prepare dinner. I'm working from home, so dinner might even be my responsibility on a work day, even though I'm lecturing. So it's my job as a person, again, trying to be the best version of myself that I can be, to honestly look at the day, not lie to myself, but just, do I have time to do this? And if the answer is yes, then there should be no problem, right? As long as I'm honest with myself.
Yeah.
So it's, if you lie to yourself and say, do I have time for this? Yeah, sure, wink, wink. Then you're going to open up the opportunity for some consequences to start in your way. Like when the blocks are not fitting correctly at the bottom half of the puzzle, it starts stacking and eventually it's going to hit the ceiling and you will lose that round of Tetris because you're not lining things up right.
Yeah.
And also it's important to remember that we are more than our job. That people burn out if they let their job take more than it gives. If you're scheduled to work 8 hours and you're putting in 15, that is a bad psychological deal for you.
That's a big problem.
That's a huge problem. And so just because you stop what you're doing to relax does not mean that you're irresponsible. And that is a big misnomer that I have to talk about all the time, is the only things that make you a valuable person is not clocking in and clocking out. It's not the numbers on your paycheck. It's not, that those things are useful for you as a person, but you can actually define yourself based on your passions and hobbies much more than your work, depending on what your work is.
I can see, looking at the chat, there's been a few fairly good points there raised by both Tina and Effect as well. Effect mentioned there as well, many full-time streamers average 4 to 6 hours a day. Many of them play fast-paced shooters or games which include high brain activity. But where do you find, looking at mental and emotional well-being and energy levels, where do you feel as though it draws too much energy from you? Do you find that 4 to 6 hours of playing Call of Duty might be quite intensive and mentally exhausting and draining, or do you find that maybe a slower paced game, maybe like Persona 5 or maybe like Legend of Zelda, where you've actually got puzzles that you've got to solve, do you find that those kind of games that are a lot slower tend to drain more energy?
That really depends on the player. I personally enjoy games that are not PvP style, but then there are streamers who have built this whole identity around PvP. I like shooters, but again, not PvP shooters.
Yeah.
Other people don't see much of a point at all doing a shooter game if you're not shooting other players. Yeah. They look at the campaign like that's the add-on, whereas I tend to think the campaign is the game.
Definitely.
And so I think that high brain activity kind of thing, those micro decisions that create the gaming experience, however you connect with those, your style of game, that's fine. Those are things that if you're playing a game that you experience what we call a flow, and psychological flow is actually really important for us to feel somewhere in our life.
Yeah.
That the way the game presents you with a challenge, but also empowers you to navigate that challenge, the way that each individual game speaks to a person, that's what I'm truly fascinated by. That is the difference between the PvP SWTOR players and then the rating SWTOR players. And some people enjoy both, but would still acknowledge that it's a different thing.
Yeah.
Boss mechanics versus you know, going into your bag of tricks to defeat another player creatively are two very different problem solving processes.
I
And
sorry, go on.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you look at how the brain is it's such a very complex part of the body when it comes to actually trying to understand it. You know, I think you could probably have 10,000 people in a stadium, and everybody's going to handle those games and those energy levels at such different frequencies.
Yeah. Well, if you had 10,000 people in a stadium too, you would maybe expect 50 to 100 to even be experiencing a negative pattern of consequences with the way they play games.
Yeah.
It's not a huge percentage of people that need to stop playing games and go to therapy and receive this uh, sort of detox period where they just disconnect. And you would actually look at those 10,000 people and you'd have very different stories about the function the game serves in their life. Looking at some of the comments in the chat, there's some questions about escape and how the game presents a different reality.
Yeah.
And escape is one of those things that games are, of course, created for. Before we had video games, it would be television shows. Before that, we had book chapters, radio dramas.
Yeah.
And we're always trying to find these new worlds to invest our mental energy into. And a lot of our life lessons come out of our desire to do this. Going back even to when our stories followed a more oral tradition and people would travel from town to town and sit in the town square telling these stories, a la ancient Greece and times like that. Our desire to imagine a greater purpose for people experience a struggle we can relate to is one of the coolest things about being human.
Yeah.
However, if you are trying to escape all the time, again, knowing that it's time to do an escape activity, there is some wisdom to that. But if you have to escape all the time, that means there are things in your environment that maybe they should be addressed.
Yeah.
And maybe some of that creative problem solving, instead of learning a boss mechanic, developing the courage to have open conversations with people who are causing this distress, setting a boundary with yourself towards that other person, looking at the real life things that you're escaping from instead of just embracing the fact that you are escaping. That's really what I do, is I help people to tell the difference, that it's great to relax and unwind and escape, and it's great when you have an office job to invest yourself in a world like Azeroth, or signing into I mentioned Final Fantasy, of course mentioned Star Wars The Old Republic.
Yeah.
Those are great activities to have as a tool for your life, but if you're over relying on them, then there is the real life version of yourself that might have a quest objective to check off.
Yeah. I think even looking at Tina's comment in particular there, she's mentioned there that she uses gaming if she's feeling quite high anxiety levels, or if she's feeling that level of depression. Do you feel like it's just hiding from the problem rather than dealing with it, or is it okay to use games to try and switch your mood up? I think what you got to bear in mind there is that stress and anxiety levels can be healthy for you where it is managed and controlled safely. And that's the important bit to remember. It's no different than if I'm at work and my boss comes over and he says, right, okay, we've had so and so call in sick today, there's a project that needs to be done by the end of the day, he's got most of it done, can you finish it off? I might have never done that particular project. I might have never invested any time into it before. I might feel the anxiety and the stress of, I've got 8 hours of my day here to get a project finished that I've never even touched before. But on the flip side, I could look at it as, well, my boss must have only come to me if he felt that I was competent and capable enough of actually delivering that product at the end of the day. So it gives you some reassurance there that you've got a support framework around you, you've got colleagues, you've got your boss, and you know that you've got people there that if you need to ask or if you want to ask for any help, you can do without fear of repercussion. And
Well,
that's exactly what I think is very important for Tina to bear in mind there, is that with anxiety and depression in particular, they're notorious for running side by side. They're notorious for causing quite crippling levels of anxiety and stress for people at times, and sometimes people deal with it worse than other people. That's okay. It just means that they're at a worse point in their journey of dealing with the problems that they're facing. But I think being able to, and it ironically it actually touches into Effect's follow-up point of that it being a safe haven, and I think that's very right. You know, it can be used as a safe haven to try and help you with managing, just like if your doctor was to prescribe antidepressants or any sleeping medication to help you with your anxiety.
yeah, that's right. So with medications, sometimes your brain really does need them
Yeah,
because what happens is different areas of your brain, particularly related to your mood and positive affect,
yeah,
sometimes they get quite lazy over time because you may consistently experience this message that such and such thing is not going well. And then that transfers into this other core belief of, I'm less worthy, I'm not as good. And if you're experiencing thoughts like that, a medication can block those negative emotional states from triggering as fast, which gives you a chance to work on those thoughts and replace them
yeah,
with the more positive or realistic alternative, which is this is just challenging, I'm doing the best I can. I do have worth, I'm just hitting a rough patch with this particular part of my life. And then if you can do both of those things at the same time, the medication can take the chemical side of your brain and your rational thinking can get restarted.
yeah,
And that is why, I mean, the psychiatrists that I've worked side by side with in my career always believed that the pills alone are not going to help their clients to figure things out. It just opens the doorway for the things I'm talking about to have a chance to work.
exactly how I
And
explain it to my clients at work. People, because
yeah,
I don't just deal with people who want to move nearer to the labour market and move back into employment, but I also deal with people who have got or have had ongoing mental health issues, and it's like I've said to them, this isn't the Matrix. Your doctor's not Morpheus. He's not offering you the blue pill and the red pill here. It's not a magic wand that'll fix everything for you. You've got to go through a variety of therapies along the way as well. Those medications are there to bring you down, mellow you, chill you out, bring your body back round to actually restarting itself again, like a computer or like a car engine. It's trying to change that overwhelming feeling of nausea and sickness to feeling more like butterflies in your tummy. It's,
yeah,
it's trying to bring you back down to a natural level, but the thing is, we have conditioned our brain over the generations that we'll try something once, and if it doesn't work, then we won't bother with it again. And that's the problem, is that people can sometimes lapse all of these different therapies into one pot, into one container, and they've tried one of them. They might have tried CBT, they might have tried DBT, they might have tried counselling, they might have tried release therapies, and maybe it's not worked, and automatically their mindset is that's letting their anxiety back in, and then their anxiety is trying to talk them back around out of the problem of saying, well, it's not worked, so it's never going to work, you're always going to be like this. And it's difficult to try and get back out of that mindset and actually realise, I mean, I've done counselling 3 or 4 times over my life for quite serious stuff, and I explain it to even my own clients as being it's like you're the Titanic and the problems that you're facing is an iceberg. If you go full steam ahead into that iceberg, you're going to sink.
Oh
Instead,
yeah, ouch.
you've got to get off of the Titanic with your pickaxe, and you've got to start chipping away at that iceberg and make it into smaller bergs, just to make it easier to actually break through that eventually.
Yeah, I like that idea too because it really does harken to some of that psychoanalytical concept of the problems of the iceberg being beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And some of those early psychological theories were about getting into the unconscious or subconscious and bringing those problems up to where we're aware of them.
Yeah.
We can actually explore them now. And as we explore them, we can develop a strategy for them. And then that's when CBT and other more present focused approaches become useful. But you can't problem solve for something you're not aware of, and you can't make progress on something that you're not attempting. One of the biggest challenges that I face, and this does connect a little bit with game players too, is we learn in video games this process of leveling up, where you create a character. You know you don't have all of your moves on your bar. Yep. You know you do not have wealth. You do not have gear. And when you try to teach people a new skill in life that they can use, a new coping skill, or don't dodge that conversation, have that conversation.
Yeah.
Well, they expect it to click like they're a max level character instantly. But if we really learn from our video games about how life works, we start at level 1 and we become level 2 and we get a new move on our bar because we're better at that character's life. That's how we are with practicing these new techniques and these new approaches for being aware and being present in our own life. Is whatever I teach people to do, coping skill-wise, they're going to be pretty awful at it the first week. And they have to stick with it. Even with medications, it can take 3 weeks of taking that pill every single day at the right time before your brain really learns what that chemical is.
Yeah.
And then all the organ systems of your body know what they're supposed to do with that new thing running through your veins.
And the difficulty being with the medication side of it is that even though a lot of the antidepressant medications are generally within the same family, they can all have such different and varying effects. I used citalopram for a short period of time, and I found that I was getting really narky. I had snappy moods. I was literally seeing red just with click of fingers. Constant nausea, feeling exhausted, no appetite, and yet my doctor moved me onto escitalopram, which is still within that family, but it had less negative effects. But again, it's also down to perception of how that person is thinking and how they're actually tackling the problem. If they look at the medication and think, well, that one's made me feel so crap after a couple of days, I don't want to go and do any of the other tablets, I don't want to go down the medication route, and it's the exact same turnaround as what we've had with the therapies.
Yeah, and okay, so psychotropic medication is its own branch of medicine.
Yeah.
You know, you declare that you're going into psychiatry in med school if that's the thing that you want to do.
Yeah.
And it's because the brain is so different than the other organ systems that you will take medications to help. we know much more dependably what will happen to a person taking medication to help with their digestive process,
Yeah.
their respiratory system. You know, with the brain, side effects are a given. And, when it comes to mood, everyone's mood works in a similar way, but the extremities are different person to person. And it's inexact, and you have to basically deploy the scientific method of, we're going to try you at this level. Oh, okay, well, that's an SSRI, so let's take you off of that. In 2 months, we'll try a tricyclic.
Yeah.
Okay, that worked a little better, but you're a little sluggish for much of your morning. Let's lower the dose. Oh my goodness. So I don't need to keep going with that my self role play.
Yeah.
But I think everyone listening can understand that it's an inexact process because the person matters so much, and figuring out how they're affected.
Yeah.
Whereas, video games can do some of those same things by the way the person plays and immerses themselves. But, just like medications come with side effects, that gaming idea is going to carry a side effect potential as well. Because if you, let's say you hate your job and it just exhausts your personhood, and you get home by 6:30 p.m. Instead of having a nice dinner with healthy ingredients, it's basically fast food and then just pounding energy drinks so that you can, PvP with people in 3 time zones that way and 3 time zones that way.
That sounds like me.
Okay. So before you know it, that 6:30 p.m. is 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, because you're trying to connect and just conquer 7 time zones worth of people.
Yeah.
And then so you feel good about your evening, but you're now exhausted physically, whereas coming home from work you were exhausted mentally. So now you're a unified whole. Your work took everything away from you on the emotional and psychological side. The game just took everything away from you on the physical side. You get 3 hours of sleep and then wake up, shower, and rush back to work to do it again.
Yeah.
That is a recipe for being depleted as a person. So that desire to cope was a great idea, but the execution of the plan, it created deficits in all areas of your person.
Yeah.
And, we have video games that teach us that. Any game that looks at the weight of what you're carrying, I'm thinking like the Dark Souls, Demon Souls kind of formula, where it's like, well, sure, you can wield this 2-handed weapon and wear this really thick metal armor, but you're going to move like a turtle. Okay? And then, so, I think games like that, the built-in message is you can choose to do whatever you want, but different choices have different costs. You can wear light armor or just cloth and have, dual wield, and you can dodge everything, but when you actually hit them, it's going to be like chipping away at their health bar because you carry no power with those weapons now. And it's just fascinating to think about how games teach us about moderation and deliberate decision-making with consequence. And yet, because it's behind that wall of fictional virtual world decision-making, sometimes we don't apply it to ourselves and realize that, oh, wow, we're making that decision about work too. And maybe work is so demanding because I'm exhausted every day that I go in. So the gaming is both the coping skill and part of the root cause of the problem. Or maybe you need a career change. That's a very scary thought for some people because we invest so much time into getting to that point where we have a career that re-rolling a new character isn't everyone's cup of tea.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, and I think when you look at the generations and how big of a difference there is between mindsets as well, I mean, I'm 30. My grandparents are in the 70s. My parents are in the 50s, and my parents can at least relate to the game aspect of stuff because they saw the early creations and the early concepts of gaming, whereas grandparents can't, and straight away they're automatically going to be of a mindset of the gaming is bad for you. It's going to cause, you're going to have all these negative thoughts. You're going to have that anger build up. Why are you playing Grand Theft Auto? Why are you driving around and shooting cops? And why are you trying to break into an army base? If you go and do that in the States, you're going to get yourself killed. But it's that level of escapism from reality for us is what cocoons us as gamers. It gives us that chance to actually feel safe in an environment where there are no consequences.
Of course, yeah. You told me that the connection between video games and real life aggressive behaviors might be something to talk about. And I have I've always had my perspective on this that I can go into at any time, but I decided to collect some more research on this over the weekend. And the funny thing is there's still people in the research field saying that there are conclusive connections between certain styles of gameplay and real world aggression, and then there's others saying there's no effect at all. And you look at the experimental design for these publications, and regardless of which ones you like and which ones you don't like, you look at these studies and it's like, okay, I can see how they structured it. I can see this data and I can see how they made this conclusion. So the answer from the field so far is, it's this mush of there's no definitive explanation as to why gaming as a coping or violent games as a coping mechanism can have some aggressive tendencies come to light. But the bottom line is, one thing is consistent across all research. Playing a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 or Call of Duty does not directly correlate with aggressive violence towards the kinds of people who are being defeated in the game. So cops, women, that you don't have this mentality where the escapism goes so far that I can behave this way as a character in Grand Theft Auto and that becomes okay in the real world. That's just not how it works at all. The kinds of research impacts that you do tend to see, if anything, even in the yes, this does exist kind of publications, is being more irritated towards your spouse, unhealthy assertiveness towards superiors at work. Assertiveness is good, but maybe playing GTA as your start your day appetizer from 6 a.m. to 7:30 before you go to work puts you in a bad spot if you're, if you get a, can you tell me the status of this project email from your supervisor? Maybe not the best way to start your day if you have underlying anger management problems, for example. So there are so many variables in play with a study like that you can't put the causal blame on video games, but you can begin a dialogue of, is this a contributing factor?
Yeah.
And so the way that the field of psychology is looking at that question, we're never going to answer it. That question goes back to television, movies in color versus movies in black and white. Blood is red now instead of this other color that you can't tell the difference because it's a Hitchcock film. So it's just, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where science says, aha, we've definitely figured this one out.
Yeah.
I think as a counselor, though, when I think about the games that people with different kinds of problems, again, these are people who have decided, I want to do counseling as a way to find the solution to my problem right now. that there are certain games that I've never counseled anyone for playing. Then there are other games that a player of that game comes into my office all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's really research. It's just my experience. And some of that has to do with game popularity and, the awareness. Like, it's just a fact. The odds that a random person out of a lineup has played Call of Duty is much higher than the odds that a random person in a lineup has played Star Wars The Old Republic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So studies like that can't really say anything definitively. And it's really important to be able to notice when your mood is changing as a person as a result of a game.
Yeah.
That, there may be certain games that are just not good for you because of who you are. And then other games might help you to relax and help you to tap into a mentality that is entirely good for you. I've actually read articles about the mindfulness benefits of a game like Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Because that is a game that is designed for presence and some escapism, but you don't even have to go kill the enemies in that game. You can run around, you can get ingredients, you can cook, you can rest, you can climb. The flow that the brain experiences, which I guess I need to make a diversion back to psychological flow in order to unlock the next stage of this conversation. Psychological flow is the experience the brain feels when the challenge you're undertaking is in perfect balance with the skill that you have as a player. It's not too easy and it's not too hard.
Yeah.
It's just right, if we want to go with the Goldilocks method of storytelling. The challenge, if it's too easy, needs to rise. If it's too hard, your skill needs to improve.
Yeah.
And if you can keep that in balance, a magical thing happens with the neurotransmitters and the pleasure reward systems of our brain. It's like everything is dancing, it's in perfect harmony, and everything is just popping, and your cognitive awareness as a player fades into just somehow you're pressing the right buttons. You're not mentally aware that you're playing a game anymore.
Yeah.
And for other contexts, this is bizarre. My students look at me all the time like I'm crazy when I say this, but I actually experience this feeling when I'm writing research papers or when I'm doing my sorcerer rotation, and I'm like detached from a certain goal for my DPS numbers. When it's just do the rotation, do the moves, and the priority system, and my thumb on the side of my mouse is just hitting the numbers, and it's just beautiful. Also, when I'm writing sentence after sentence and I know the research and I'm just plugging in the names and I'm not having to look up anything, I'm not having to stop to think about my next idea, it's just flowing through my fingers as I type.
Yeah.
And people experience this with rock climbing, not just Link, but real rock climbing. The game of chess, tennis, ballet room dancing, all kinds of things. It's just, that is one of the things that I'm always interested in understanding. What gives this feeling to the players? That flow, that perfect balance where the game fits into your cognitive presence.
Yeah. So let's say that you're looking at, and I know you were saying there about it's more likely that certain violent games will not contribute towards that aggressive behaviour, but where do you draw the line with that? I mean, if you look at some games, FIFA as a prime example, as a football or a soccer game, however you want to look at it, I've seen people rage playing that game to the point where they will launch their controller across the room and that controller will shatter. I've seen people fist pump their keyboards and launch the mice across the room and end up breaking them. I've seen people kick the glass side panels on the desktop PCs in frustration and end up shattering the glass on it. But is that deemed as a healthy way of them being able to vent their anger and the frustration, or is it deemed as a problem?
Well, I think it comes down to what is the consequence to the person for doing that. Does that make them look cool to their streaming audience? Is it worth it? Do they have the money to replace that easily, or is it now an inconvenience for them? What's the consequence, right? In terms of games that come into my office all the time, I just smiled when you started talking about FIFA, because that one, for whatever reason, that is a lifestyle kind of game.
Yeah.
And especially for people who take it seriously, and it's not even necessarily fans of soccer, it's this other community in and of itself. And that's one of the ones where I feel uneducated, because I don't get that one at all. And I like sports games, I don't see the appeal, because I only see the problems.
Yeah.
The anger, though, if you go back maybe a couple answers ago, I hinted that anger management is more of the issue in certain situations than playing of the video game, right? If you're the kind of person who's going to pick up your computer and say that computer is worth $2,000 to you and just chuck it because the thing you're watching on your screen went bad, that is a point where anger and your value as a person, fear as you project your own self into the future, whatever is boiling over, and you're making a snap decision to do something that is illogical, damaging to something that has a valuable presence in your life. And that might be a sign that the game has taken up a mental space for you that it was not designed to take up.
Yeah.
That you are more of a FIFA enthusiast than you are a game player and a person in those circumstances. So circumstance is really important. Context, I should say, is really important for understanding what it is we're looking at. A person could be angry only in the face of losing something that has a high amount of credibility riding on it. But in general, they could be a very relaxed person.
Yeah.
Meaning FIFA or certain kinds of games could be unlocking this thing that is repressed and controlled in all other circumstances. And so it's not like we should attack that person and say you have a all-encompassing anger management problem, but there is something very important. Again, it's about answering the questions about your life honestly to yourself.
Yeah.
Is this game helping you to be present in your life? Is it helping you to put your best foot forward? Is it helping you to become what it is you hope that you want to be known as? And if FIFA is part of that identity, then it stands to reason you must invest your care and your energy into FIFA. What are you sacrificing to do that? And are you okay with it? But, there are probably people who stream FIFA who financially, because of what streaming and gaming has done for them, are living a very good version of their life. But as a result, they care very much about how certain games played by them, games played by other people in their league, play out. And we just get to watch that rage flare up from time to time. And that's part of the game. Other people, we can't just say that's part of the game, because it will take them 16 months to get the money up to replace that PC that they just sent flying across the room. So it's context, it's resources, and person to person. How big of a deal is this?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we've had a question in chat as well. Hey guys, my ex left me after 5 years and got with someone else within less than a week. This was 4 months ago and she's been with a man for 3 months. I don't miss her, but I'm upset how she went about it. and I do miss being wanted. Do you have any advice for me? I think what you've got to bear in mind there is that when you look at a relationship and you look at the elements of a relationship, there's going to be good points, there's going to be bad points. That relationship ended for a reason, and the difficulty being is that there's always going to be one out of two people in that relationship who will already start making a step forward, and the other person is already kind of holding back. But it's trying to kind of get your mindset around that and actually understand that, and get yourself to a point of where you're ready to move forward. And that's where I use therapies as an example here, and I say to my own clients, look, just because you've tried counselling or you've tried CBT or DBT or anything like that, it might not have worked. It doesn't mean that it's never going to work. It just means that at that point in your journey, you are not ready to take that leap of faith forward. And it becomes a blue pill and red pill kind of situation then, and it's looking at what can I actually do to gradually move myself forward. And yeah, effect makes a fair point. Get closure with the ex-partner, that will alleviate you to some extent. It may do, but equally it could have a negative impact there. I don't know what you think about that, Doc.
Well, I was brought into this thinking space of one of my favorite Captain Picard quotes, which this may be a curveball for people who are expecting me to just go with the Star Wars angle, but I love this particular quote. It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness. That is life. Okay. Now, what we have in the chat from Captain Kooky is it's part of the story, and it's from one perspective, and it's very disappointing to read that a relationship would end and one person moves on very quickly and another person is left to deal with the aftermath because this change was imposed on them, it sounds like, instead of being their choice.
Yeah.
And that is a tough break, but it also is the result of two people living side by side who both have free will and have made a decision somewhere in that timeline of what they're going to do, and have chosen how they're going to go about doing it. And sometimes a surprise like that is extremely disappointing, and I would just say to someone who's gone through that to give themselves time to process and find acceptance, and to remember that if being in a relationship is part of your plan for having a good, healthy, balanced life, then being with someone who doesn't want to be with you is actually a bad time investment.
Absolutely.
And it takes a lot of self-esteem and courage to walk into the future being at peace with a breakup we didn't ask to have happen, but giving yourself a chance to find a better partner who isn't going to do that to you is always better than locking someone into something that they would rather not be a part of. And a lot of times in counseling, I'm trying to be unbiased and help the person find what's best for them, but they're trying so hard to reunify with someone who just is not the right fit. And other times, self-esteem works the opposite way, and they block themselves from opportunities that are clearly there, but they don't have the courage to be vulnerable. And emotions and are attachments to people. This is where Star Wars comes in. That unhealthy attachments are really what all of the George Lucas episodes of Star Wars are about. And even the final 3 episodes too. We see what total belief in a certain system does when things don't go your way, and not having the flexibility to adapt and putting what we want over the idea of, but what's good for me. In the case of Luke being on Octo, right? Like just this total rejection of, what can be okay for me from this point, because he was attached to the legend, right? And when he's lamenting to Rey about the legend of Luke Skywalker, a lot of people don't like that particular film. And I've been in that place too, believe me. But when I'm trying to stay positive about it and overcome my own attachment to what I think Star Wars should be, and look at it like a clinician, this is a person that is just trying to force this attachment to the Force into being something it can't be anymore. Drinking your own Kool-Aid and, what is, whether it's a breakup or a severe life disappointment, there are paths and options even in the midst of that heartache.
Yeah.
And you might not have the energy to walk those paths right now, and that's fine too. But remember that they are there, and when you're ready to get back up and walk, do it.
Definitely. I think looking at Captain Cook's follow-up there about that she supposedly had feelings for him the whole time that they were together. He thinks that she was maybe trying to hurt him just in spite, but I think when you look at relationships in general now as well, Doc, the whole mindset of relationships is changing. Like if you look back at your parents or your grandparents' kind of generations, they were of that kind of generation of you leave school, you find somebody, you marry them, you have family, you settle down, you stay together until you both die. Whereas nowadays, people are starting to recognise that it's okay to be from a broken family. It's more common now that a child may have a mum and a dad who are not together now. It's the same with my kids, and even I grew up in a broken family. But I always look at it as that I would rather see a child growing up where they've got two parents who may be separated, but they are happy in their own bubble, rather than them two parents being together and constantly being at each other and having a go and creating them negative vibes. And it's becoming a lot more common now, I find, and it's difficult to try and balance all of those kind of emotions when you've got something like that going on in the background.
Yeah, it can be. And on the topic of where we've gone with the idea of broken families, we have the terminology blended families now. The way that we educate up and coming healthcare professionals and people who deal with families. And I think that's a restructuring of the whole concept, is saying that, broken implies something needs to be fixed. But, sometimes when new families get broken, but then they spin into merging with another family and you get that blending, or you get amended family, that it's not broken anymore, that they've rediscovered that completeness.
Yeah.
Although the roster has had a shuffling up, that there's a person who's not there anymore. Maybe the parents divorce, maybe it's an unexpected death, maybe it's, all kinds of things lead to this situation. And it's really important to remember that there's so many different ways for life to be good, right? To be deemed worthy. A lot of people make the mistake of judging how other people live their life with the idea that their own narrative is the right one and all other narratives are not.
Yeah.
And that is such a huge mistake and a misrepresentation of what being healthy is, that there are many other options besides the ones that any one person makes.
Yeah.
That are still healthy and have some real strengths and acceptable limitations. And if your desire is to help people instead of judge people, then you can do great things with just that little bit of awareness.
Yeah.
And not everyone on this earth is here as a helper, too. That's its own identity in and of itself. Just like in video games, just to reel us back in, not everyone is a healer. Some people are tanks, some people are DPS, some people are multifaceted in that one area of what they choose to play and what they choose to create. And it's a different mentality. The goals come together and they create a great harmony when you have good people fulfilling all three roles at the same time. And if you're missing one of the roles, then there are things lacking and challenges become nearly impossible. And I think that's a really great metaphor for what a family is, too.
I find it quite remarkable how vastly and how quickly the attitude towards the gaming community in general has changed over the last decade or so, especially perhaps over the last 2 decades. In that, if you go back to the early 2000s, gamers would have been seen as these geeky nerds and they don't have friends and they just sit in front of a computer all day playing video games, kind of like the sort of stuff you'd see in South Park. But
Ha! I love that episode, by the way.
yeah. But it's changed so much now to the point where even the British Army is openly pointing out in their recruitment videos about the benefits and the mindsets of even a gamer or somebody who just plays games or streams, and using raids as an example here, right? You're building up team bonding skills. You're showing your leadership. You're showing your characteristics there and being able to actually organise a raid, sorting out your times, right? I'm sorting out the groups, right? I want my DPS over here, I want my healers over there, I want my tanks right in front of me there, and then we're going to do it as boom, 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 and it's all done in a loop order like that. But they look at it as that you've got such an advantage there in your leading, your communicating, your collaborating, your partnering, being able to look at the bigger picture, being able to look at where people are falling flat and where we need to make little adjustments here and there. And those are the kind of skills that, ironically, the army are going for now. And it's remarkable to show how over 20 years the gaming community has changed in the world's eyes.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I run into in my own professional life is I'm one faculty in a pretty big counseling program because we do online and we do campus-based learning as well. And I'm the only one who does games in the kind of way that, MMO players do games. Actually, one of my department chairs plays games as well. But not to the level where he would want to research them.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure he enjoys them, whereas I'm just like, how can I turn this into a work task? So maybe he's got the better idea. But back to the point.
He has the high ground.
Oh, well, yes, but he often underestimates my power. Okay, so a lot of our departmental tasks or projects honestly are easier to complete than getting a team through Temple of Sacrifice in Star Wars The Old Republic. Okay? Honestly, it takes so much more coordination between 8 people, and even on story mode, to finish that operation than it would to communicate by email, share a Google document, write your content on time, and get this project done.
Yeah.
And when I point this out to people, it's crickets because no one knows what an operation or a raid is. And I think that is really great to juxtapose with the military and other jobs that are looking at the cognitive and structural benefits of being part of a team-based online community. Because the awareness of how to be part of a team and do your role in the face of a mechanical problem, right? That we need a taunt to go off here, we need AoE heals instead of single target here, and we need to do raid buffs so the DPS can burn this thing down.
Yeah.
That's 3 very and one of the healers needs to cleanse something. So now we have 4 very different tasks that all fit into one group of people with one strategy. getting things done at the same time. And even academia doesn't really teach people how to do this. And I know this is true because there's a couple of classes where I have group projects involved. And there's always a person who does 90% of the work. There's always a person who sends an email to the whole group the day before and says, sorry, I'm not going to be participating. I hope you guys can pick up the slack. Something came up. And then there's always like two people that fade into the background and they'll do stuff, but only if you hound them by email to remember what their job is.
Yeah.
And, you know, basically, these are grad students who are not coming together anywhere close to as effectively as a raid team does because there's no buy-in on the purpose.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing something based on the goal of having a grade instead of based on the goal of doing something efficiently, effectively, exceptionally.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a group of faculty who have never been on a raid team, a group of students who have never been on a raid team, and I'm the military for my country, I love to see in a person's background that they understand the procedural ability to be on comms and, you know, surround a building and go into the building on the left while the other person covers the roof on the right and, you know, just systematically achieve success through teamwork. Because one person running straight towards the building, they're just going to get sniped. It's over.
Yeah.
And games can teach that teamwork process in ways that education seemingly can't, and education through a webcam definitely can't. You're relying too heavily in that situation on people enjoying technology and being aware what their resources actually are in a situation like that.
What are your thoughts in terms of when you're looking at a particular operation, for example? So you're going in, you're doing a raid. Let's say you might prominently be a DPS, and then at last minute you're having to change to a healer spec. How do you deal with that change at such short notice in a role that you might not be as familiar with?
Okay. Well, I think that flexibility is a trait that often is connected with personality, whether it's a trait-based or a type-based personality taxonomy. You have in the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is the one I used in my SWTOR research, you have the final letter is either a J for judging or P for perceiving. The judging style person, which that's the letter I have, really does want to stick to the script and fulfill the agenda and do what is planned.
Yeah.
The P person is, let's not plan it, let's wing it, let's be flexible, let's be spontaneous, and then that would be fine to them. But situations are a factor as well. You don't just rigidly adhere to the script of whether you have that J or you have that P. So inside an MMO, I used to be a healer, but I have been a DPS for a couple years now. So I would look at that particular proposition like, sure, let's switch. I can do that. If it makes the team have a chance at success tonight, let's do it.
Yeah.
Also, on the other end, if we can find someone to fill in who is a healer by trade, and that's the primary thing they do, then that might be a better strategic choice than transferring me over. Because if I'm weaker as a healer than someone who is an option, we want the best situation for the team. So it's a deliberate decision there based on who's available and how is the team going to respond and what's the team's chemistry with different people plugging into that spot. I think you could throw in tanking there too, since I do that far less, but I still would look at the challenge. Like, if I believe that we have a chance at success with that being the solution we choose, then I would love to do that. But you have to have an awareness too of what's being asked of you.
Yeah.
your DPS numbers can be a factor on higher difficulty level. So, master mode, it's great for the team if you're a tank and you're able to still chip in 3,000 DPS points per second. And that helps for the threshold of what your DPS have to hit to change from maybe 12,000 per second to 11 to 10.
Yeah.
And so, but your primary goal there is to have the aggro secure so that the bosses don't wipe out your DPS, because you can't do any DPS if you're dead. And so there's all kinds of strategic insights there in terms of the strategy and in terms of what does it really mean to choose one of these DPS and switch them over? And was that due to the perception they have playing the rest of the night? I know many DPS players who play those other roles. I know others who will not play those other roles. And, you probably should stick with asking people to do that who are comfortable with that transition.
Yeah.
Because there are people who will not take that well at all, for sure.
Definitely. Do we have any other questions coming from chat at the moment? I'm intrigued to see what people's thoughts are on what we've gone through so far as well. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground already, but I think we can certainly have a look at some other areas as well. How do you find adjusting your mindset whenever you're playing different games? Because I've noticed, especially with your streams as well, that you've played such a varying amount of different games recently: Persona 5, Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, Star Wars: The Old Republic as well. But how do you cope with changing your mindset and your logical thinking process in the varying games that you're playing at the moment?
Yeah, that's actually really tough, and I didn't realize how tough it would be when I set out on adding different games to my channel. But the first couple times that I stream a new game, it's so hard to hit that spiritual sort of essence of what I am inside that game space. Yeah. Because there are things in my mind that I want DrGameology to be. And, that idea, not necessarily aiming for third person speak, but that obviously I'm a professor, I'm a counselor, and I love playing games, and I always have. And so when I get a chance to play games for people, I have this idea of what I want them to see in me in my channel. And most recently, the newest game I've added is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And I've never played this game. I was working on the dissertation phase of my program when it came out, or maybe I had just finished, but I was trying to get a placement as a faculty, so I was not playing a lot of video games at that stage of time. The game passed me by, and I love Zelda. Link is my main go-to person in Smash Bros. It's Ocarina of Time. This is a very popular stance, but it's my favorite Zelda game of all time, and maybe
it
may be in my top 3 all time. Throwing in Final Fantasy VII, original and remake. I'm loving that remake, and either KOTOR or SWTOR. Knights of the Old Republic probably is the reason that I played Star Wars: The Old Republic, but I did my dissertation on the MMO. So in my mind, they're definitely near the same thing.
Yeah.
But if people want to force me to choose, I would say SWTOR, because that was my name for a couple years, Dr. SWTOR, before I had to change it for professional reasons. And so back to the Breath of the Wild experiences, it's so open and it's relaxing, and I don't have the same prompt to be excited the whole time and loud, and well, loud, my standard of loud is still probably very introverted and quiet, but it's much easier to like blow up with things that I'm exclaiming when I'm doing a WWE 2K20 stream, for example, where I'm just trying to be ridiculous. Maybe yell at my streaming partner and be in that heel mode mentality and make fun of him, make fun of the crowd in the game. And then juxtapose that with Persona 5, where the Jungian symbolism, the meaning Carl Jung, early psychologist and former partner of Sigmund Freud before splitting off. I really love his approach to psychology and how it factors into what became the sort of the foundation of describing the monomyth a la Joseph Campbell. That's really one area of my professional life that I'm most proud of, is entering that arena and commenting on the hero's journey as a metaphor for the way we live life in different ways. But Persona, it's so easy for me to be this other version of Dr. Gameology because the topics are everywhere. My screen is plastered with things I can talk about, whether it's, the symbolism of we're in this subconscious psychological subway station going deeper and deeper through the rings of hell, and let's kill this demon that's sitting on the toilet, and what does that mean? And then this high school player trying to date all of the girls in his class, in more of the real world half of that game. It's just the psychological wealth of topics is nonstop in that game. And as a streamer, it maybe takes a couple streams to wade through that and figure out, well, what does it feel like for Dr. Gameology to be in this game?
Yeah.
And then I find it, and it's just like, now I can do this, right? And it's just so neat. The Last of Us Part 2 is also very tough because it's such a downer. It's so torturous to play because even the happy moments are terrible. And, I have to add music sometimes to it with the little Streamlabs apps, because that snaps me into a different world where I'm playing a downer game, but with techno music in my head. And that little bit unlocks it so I can see the chat easier and I can remember it. And I'm not just having this high tension that I'm about to get jumped by these deformed clicker enemies, that I can just remember more easily that I'm a streamer and that I'm looking for psychological concepts to dive into. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the mentality from 4 or so of the games that I'm streaming these days.
I find it very weird how there's so many varying games in the MMO genre, and yet they can have such big differences in how you actually approach the game or the genre. A prime example, before I actually started with Star Wars The Old Republic, back when beta and launch started, I had actually tried World of Warcraft back then, and it was back when the Burning Crusade was like the expansion, and yet I just couldn't for the life of me get into it. I just couldn't grasp it, and yet I managed to get into SWTOR perfectly fine, no problems, and yet jump into Guild Wars 2 without any issues, and yet here I am now, where 3 or 4 months ago I've decided to give World of Warcraft another go, and having played so many different classes within SWTOR, I started off with a Marauder, I've got a couple of tanks. I think everybody in the community knows that my forte, my experienced skill set is around a Madness Sork. That's pretty much going to be a given. And yet I was able to jump in onto World of Warcraft and create a couple of Warlocks, and I'm going around with AoE damage and dot damage left, right and centre, and I can actually grasp it now in World of Warcraft. And it's very weird how playing a game and you can't understand it, and then you come away from it, try a different game, and then go back, and it's it's like you've found that final piece to your jigsaw eventually.
Yeah, I actually went through something similar about a month back. I had a week where I downloaded ESO, and I had a week where I downloaded World of Warcraft, and I had actually 2 months earlier in the year where I subscribed to Final Fantasy 14,
Yeah.
and I love that game, but it's so much more of a grind to level up and get into group content. I haven't even made it that far, besides doing the flashpoints that are tethered to your character story. But I love Final Fantasy's approach, and I see that too, that I play Sorcerer, and I can do all three proficiently of the stances that Sorcerer has, so Lightning, Madness, and Healing.
Yeah.
I'm best at Lightning, so I'm more of a burst damage kind of person, but I knew that certain situations in Final Fantasy, I should understand the dot DPS as well. So I don't remember the names of all of the character stances in Final Fantasy, but there's one with the magic book and casting the spells that way, and that's the dot damage spec. And then there's the one with the wizard staff, and that's the burst damage spec. And my ability to understand what the character is building towards in terms of their class progression, because I have in my head that compartment for knowledge about lightning and knowledge about madness, when I play my character that's a black mage or dark mage or whatever they call it, and then the other one, I understand intrinsically where the class is building as I unlock new abilities and where I should put them on my bar, so that the psychology I have from SWTOR transfers into proficiency in other games. And then the bottom line is, because of my love of Star Wars and the mythology that's all connected to that, life lessons from Yoda and Obi-Wan, character development and heartache and devastation, such as what you see in Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader and then back.
Yeah.
Anything with a lightsaber is going to capture my my mentality towards play in a way that's quicker than something like Elder Scrolls Online will.
Yeah.
And even with my childhood love of Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness, and Beyond the Dark Portal. And then I did play the third one a little bit in high school, but not nearly the way I played Warcraft 2 in elementary school. And so jumping into World of Warcraft for the first time ever just a few weeks ago, it didn't grab me, and I think it's because the Force is missing.
Yeah.
Truly, the Force is such a neat marketing tool for Lucasfilm, honestly, that if something has that Force that binds the galaxy together, it just works for me in a way that magical spells and middle-age melee weapons doesn't.
It's very weird, isn't it? I mean, you look at if you look at it as WoW, and you look at the amount of expansions that it's got over the years. I mean, they've got Burning Crusade, Wrath of Lich King, Cataclysm, Mists Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, Legion, and then Battle for Azeroth.
Oh my gosh, that's a crazy list when you hear it out loud.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's like 8 expansions there. That is so overwhelming for a new player to go in and think, right, I want to try and play a new game now. Let's try World of Warcraft. They get a sub. They go on. They create the character. They go out. They go into Orgrimmar and they go down through Razor Hills and they're killing all of these different scorpions and they're getting a bit of XP. And it's like, if you actually sit down and look at just how much content there is in all of those expansions, plus the main story, that is so overwhelming. That's so overwhelming for a new player to actually try, but is it no different with Star Wars The Old Republic, for example? You know, when you look at the expansions that have happened over the years?
I think that one thing SWTOR does that I think must be a deliberate decision by the BioWare developers is they've made the leveling, they made the leveling system so that you progress through the levels faster than you progress through the story.
Yeah.
And you can do that group content at the end of the line without ruining your class story. Or you can skip once you get your class ship to the newest expansion
Yeah.
without a microtransaction and so on and so forth. So it's completely the player's power whether they want to experience the rise of the Hutt cartel, whether they want to invest that time in Shadow of Revan, and then go through Copy and Kotet.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a great design. I don't know how other MMOs utilize that. I know with Final Fantasy, I could get my character leveled up with a microtransaction, and I don't know what the ramifications of that are, but I guess it allows me to jump into group content. And so every MMO has that decision, is to value their history, but to give the players an experience in the current year that matches up with their psychology and their what drives them to play. And that's why understanding player motivations is such an important facet of designing a game.
Do you think that the game developers are openly aware of the mindset of the gaming community and looking at how, actually tweaking the content for the gaming players, or do you think that they're actually creating the content because that's how they want to earn their money, that's how they want to go down the route of it, they've got a plan in mind? Do you think a lot of the companies are willing to actually change their content and their roadmap to accommodate those players?
I think if you look at the way the cartel market and SWTOR works, you can get a little glimpse into how that data is utilized.
Yeah.
So if you look at what kinds of weapons people enjoy, then, well, weapon tunings, right? What are the sales for the weapon tunings? All of them are available most of the time on the market as a one-time charge. What do those tunings do to the weapons? What kind of weapons are being bought in higher volumes on the GTN, higher volumes on the cartel market? And you can begin to construct character or player profiles based on these aesthetic choices. And one thing that shocked me in my research is how people in SWTOR specifically, the overwhelming majority, are fascinated by aesthetic choices more so than content being played. So even people who love PvP are still getting their character to look good doing it. Maybe not the ranked PvP, but more like the unranked and log in and do your dailies. You're still spending time with that avatar customization.
Yep.
And the neat thing when you think about what an MMORPG is and how data mining can work in a virtual space is those developers have the most sophisticated personality test results at their fingertips, even more so than something like the MMPI. And the reason I say that is if you look at how players choose to engage the content, how players choose to pause and make aesthetic choices, when players group up and when they choose to decorate their strongholds, how they choose to decorate their strongholds, how they make their male characters look, how they make their female characters look, their gender in real life versus cross-correlating with the gender of their avatar, then you start to understand completely who that person is in a privacy-shattering kind of way. Now, hopefully companies like BioWare are looking at that data aggregately, meaning not person to person. They're looking at themes in their players, and they're catering the future of the game towards people that will translate into money for the development process, and hence the future of the game. And if they're not doing that, then they're just foolish, because the data is there. When you are deciding a product to make, and this is marketing, you want to make a product that will sell.
Yeah.
Obviously. Otherwise, you're going to go bankrupt and you're going to lose your business.
Yeah.
So you look at the costumes that come out, and I think that it makes perfect sense that when The Force Awakens come out, you get the Defiant vented lightsaber, because Kylo Ren. When Rise of Skywalker comes out, suddenly there's a white-based outfit that looks like what Rey wears that you can, it's common sense. It's the easiest decision to make, especially if you factor in what are the assets for these costumes and how long will it take for BioWare to create that outfit.
Yeah.
At least a mock-up of it that they can look at how it moves on a character and start getting the bugs fixed out of it and make it ready to sell and make money. That whatever 1,800 cartel coins is roughly almost $2, somewhere between $1.50 and $2.
Yeah.
Right? Or no, sorry, between $15 and $20. Yeah, decimal points are important, people. And so, that's a good decision on their part, but they can use this data to decide whether we get Kotfi or whether we get Shadow of Revan. The pure story, or the traditional MMO with group content and PvP arenas and a story, or whether we get Osis.
Yeah. It's very surprising how big of a difference there can be between so many different MMOs and so many different games, just how you actually take your mindset and how you actually approach and engage that particular problem in the game.
I'm sorry?
I said it's very surprising just how much variety there is there in terms of when you compare game to game or MMO to MMO, and when you look at how you're actually going to go about and solve a problem. If you look at SWTOR and WoW as a prime example, WoW has dungeons, we've got ops.
Yes. Now, I think that it's important, too, to remember WoW is one of the foundational pieces of what Blizzard does as a company. And so the resources are there to make WoW exceptional. Whereas SWTOR is just a logo on the bottom right of the BioWare.com webpage.
Yeah.
It's very obvious that Anthem and Mass Effect, Dragon Age, that there are things in front of the line at BioWare.
Yeah.
And that's obvious the way the expansions work, too. So when we get an expansion in SWTOR, the scope is, Exhibit B. And I'm sure when you get an expansion in World of Warcraft, you get Exhibit A.
Yeah.
But that's because of the question of what does this game have to be for this company. And a lot of people just want SWTOR to compete with World of Warcraft. And that's just not the game that's being played. However, I think that there is reason to believe that BioWare is looking at data and making decisions that sometimes are very tough, but that they believe is best for the future of the game.
Yeah.
Such as the swoop bike racing, which I haven't done because that does not factor into what drives me to play one bit. Just like the nightlife event, it's very hard to get an internationally certified gambling counselor to think that's a good use of their time. So, but that's just my situation. I'm one player, And they've decided that this event is compelling, and the unique companion that you can earn each year is just a riveting manipulation of dopamine flow that people are willing to invest hours into.
Yeah.
And that, again, the connection with companions is a really neat psychological concept that SWOTOR brings to the table in a way that's completely unique from what I've seen. It alters the game experience entirely and makes it a BioWare game. That's trying to have conversations the right way so that Bastila Sean ends up in the right spot, and uh, the other guy in KOTOR. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna hate myself for forgetting his name. But that's what I remember from playing KOTOR is those conversations mattered to me, and the choice to go dark side or light side changes the ending, and it becomes a defining element of that playthrough.
Absolutely.
And so just again, BioWare is creating a different game, and most of the time they own that, and they use their data in ways that definitely lines up with the majority of the player base. And then you just hear the louder voices being frustrated that they aren't the player base that BioWare is lining up with.
Yeah.
But maybe the majority of the player base isn't very vocal for a BioWare game. That they're just happy to sign in and play and never listen to TeenyCast and never go to Volk and look up operations mechanics and have no clue what a Dolphy is.
It's certainly interesting to have a look at the thought element and the mental health element of not just gaming in general, but also the mindset of a gamer. And I think what's very important for people to bear in mind and actually think about is that you have to have a good balance between home life, work life, game life, without a doubt. The last thing that you're ever going to want to do is put yourself in a situation where you're missing work, you're missing family events, you're missing social events and such, that it has an impact. You've got to find that balance, and it's difficult to do that sometimes. I use a prime scenario with my clients at work because obviously a lot of the clients that I deal with don't work. So it's like I say to them, keep to a regular routine of a set time to go to bed, a set time to get up. Make sure that you have a shower or a bath in the morning or in the evening or whatever, whichever works better for you. But don't be afraid to break your day up as well. Don't consume your whole day with just sat down playing one video game all day, because that's how you're going to burn out, both playing the game and also in day-to-day life. And you've got to break it up. So even if it's maybe from 9 a.m. through till 11, do some work-based stuff or do some chores in the house. Maybe from 11 till 1, go on and play a game. From 1 till 5, go back and do your chores and your work and all of that sort of stuff. Have some dinner, have some family time, and then from maybe 8 at night through till when you go to bed at maybe 12 a.m, sit down and play your games. It's breaking your day up, but it means then that it's easier for you to manage your own home life as well as what's going on around you without it impacting on your overall mental well-being as well. What are your thoughts, Doc?
Yeah, I actually talk with people about this quite often, is this idea of fitting in different things into your life, and this idea of doing nothing versus doing something. And a lot of times people are upset at themselves for lacking that productive time.
Yeah.
And I challenge with them all the time their idea that what they did was not productive and wasn't valuable, or that they did nothing during their entire day. That's actually impossible.
Yeah.
even, most people who want to own the idea they did nothing during their day, they meditated. And, sitting in a room with your thoughts, that's literally doing nothing. But it's nothing with a purpose, and it's nothing that accomplishes something. So you see right there, we flipped the idea of nothingness in into a concept, right, that is filled with purpose and filled with a consequence.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, even yesterday, I got an email from a student who was asking a question about class, and I answered it, and I talked about how, there's no alert for that thing they were asking me about, but I fixed it for them. And then they said, I didn't know you were teaching 8 classes and you're a gamer. That must be impossible. I was like, well, okay, but so there's an assumption there, right? That like teaching is, hierarchically more important than gaming, but somehow I'm doing both of them quite a lot. But the thing most people don't realize is I'm going to be awake at 8 a.m. and 7 a.m. and sometimes 6 a.m. almost no matter what. I counsel people on the West Coast and the East Coast of the United States almost every morning. The streams happen when I don't have a counseling session.
Yeah.
I'm converting empty time from one purpose to another purpose.
You're converting your empty time into more productive time.
That's right. And so also, since switching over to DrGameology and going really with the educational factors around the psychology of gaming, I'm creating resources too. I'm multi-purposing that time where I aim to make 2 mental health moments every week, and I don't know what these are going to be. They're not premeditated. And those short videos inside the game stream actually go into my educational persona.
Yeah.
And my students see those, and we talk about those as counselors and future counselors. And that has been the most fascinating transformation of what happens in my online classrooms, because I can have a discussion prompt talking about counseling a couple with a history of domestic violence, and the students will do the bare minimum, talking about, just participate the certain number of days, reach that threshold, get your points.
Yeah.
But I can drop in a WWE mental health moment about personal resilience, and I get 22 extra comments in the first 24 hours of people who are like, oh my gosh, you were playing WWE. I've never had a teacher that does that. Resilience, you talked about it so quickly and so well. And, it's this enthusiasm to see that psychology is all around us.
Yeah.
And for me, if I hadn't made this switch, I would have burnt out of games, because I would have had that compartmentalization where games are not the important part of me. But I chose to redefine that important side to where, like, again, just like my dissertation, that was a recalibration of, how do I make this thing that I'm passionate about and I want to know every little thing that I can into something that is professionally useful. And not everyone can do the professionally useful thing, but if you are having a stressful day and nothing is hurt by you playing 90 minutes of a video game, then play the video game and don't feel apologetic that that's good for you. Now, if you have 90 minutes to play a game and you play 7 hours, be honest with yourself and reevaluate that. Look in the mirror and figure out, oh my gosh, what happened there? That's out of control. I can't do that very often. And just learn from yourself. And that's really my message is burnout is a real thing. We burn out at work. We burn out in relationships. We burn out in games. And we can see those warning signs on the horizon. And it really is just about having that awareness and having the courage to say something's not right. I need to address it, instead of just curling up and continuing forward and not making a change when a change is very necessary.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I find that nowadays, certainly as a content creator, that I have a better mindset when it comes to being able to identify as I'm approaching. As I'm starting to approach those points of where I'm burning out, then I take a step back and I think, right, okay, yeah, I need to take a day off, I need to take 2 days off. Where do I put them days in there? What can I do to shake things up? And that's something that I touched on with you before we started the stream, is that I make sure that I do an indie night every week on a Wednesday normally. It's very rare that I will change that and put SWTOR in there, because I don't want to be streaming SWTOR every single stream. But I recently started trialing something where if we have Conquest done and we've got all the guild stuff done by the Sunday night, then we'll stream a different game on the Monday. We might stream 7 Days to Die, or we might stream Call of Duty, or we might stream, whatever games are kind of flicking through my mind at the time. But you can't expect to just hammer the same game all day, every day, and not get burnt out from it. That's just not going to happen. You will burn out and you will crash hard, and you will grow to hate the game that you've enjoyed for so long, and that's not healthy for you. Because then that's going to take that mindset of, oh, I'm tired, I've played 10 hours a day of this game for the past 10 years, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, and I'm burnt out from it. I'm just not going to bother with games now. I'm not going to play any games at all. That's it, I'm done now. Because you're that burnt out, because your mindset's taking it into the entire genre rather than into just looking at it as it's one experience.
Yeah, when you just broke it down month by month, week by week, I honestly had this feeling like, oh my gosh, that sounds like purgatory for people who may be aware of that word. But man, you have to mix it up, because this has been the problem with games since they started being connected to online capacities in the storytelling, is you always run out of content.
Yeah.
That the developers, no matter how well funded, no matter how organized the team is, they cannot outpace the consumer. And that freshness to the content is something that we can do as players. We can re-roll a character, we can play them a different moral alignment, we can play same class, different role, we can play different classes. There are things we can do to help the content extend in perpetuity. But at the end of the day, having variety is going to be a helpful psychological decision. Before we go, I want to just acknowledge one question in the chat and sort of answer it, but in a quick way.
Sure.
I was at a conference once, and one of the counselors in the audience asked me a very similar question, and it was basically, what do I think about people with autism that play video games, or other psychological kinds of things that separate them from comfortable social interactions with other people? And the research on this is pretty conclusive that the symptoms of those things that limit calmness, limit social investedness in real-world contexts, actually are nullified in the virtual game space, meaning you don't have autism inside an MMORPG, right? You're typing just the same as people who are typing. Yeah. You are hitting spacebar to indicate, come over here, make your character just repeatedly jump, the same as people who do not have this diagnosis that you have. And it's similar with PTSD, seeing the effects of returned veterans from sustained periods of battle and coping with life with escape and calm kinds of video game activities. We see it, people all the time do their escape and immersion for their own anxiety issue by playing online games, open world games, sandbox games. So there are many wellness benefits, and it is disappointing that many healthcare professionals are taking the stance of so many of our parents that's like, games are bad, do something meaningful with your life. And that's one of the key foundational points in my dissertation is the time is going to come when counselors need to be capable of having a better conversation than that.
Yeah.
And to form real therapeutic rapport with their clients who play games. Because if you do play games, but you also need counseling, and you have a parent or spouse or close friends who ask you, what did you do with your day? And your answer is, well, for a couple hours this afternoon, I grouped up with some friends across the country and we won Temple of Sacrifice on story mode. And they're like, oh, what a waste. I meant, what did you actually do with your day? That would be the same as me asking someone, what did you do with your day? And they say, well, I watched this show on Netflix. And it's like, oh my gosh, that show sucks. How could you even sit down to watch it? Think about the emotional shift that just happened in that conversation. I rejected the thing that you thought was worthy of conversation. I rejected you. And people all across the world are experiencing this with people, and they just want these people to care about them and matter the way that they matter inside their head. When I said, I'm going to share this with you because it's interesting to me, and I would like to hear you acknowledge that it's interesting for you to hear how interesting it is with me, even if you would never play it. And a lot of counselors make this mistake. A lot of parents make this mistake. A lot of spouses, boyfriends, and girlfriends make this mistake, and a lot of friends make this mistake too. And there's so many good things we've talked about the last 2 hours plus on video games. And I think we've also given fair time to the warning signs and the places to be cautious. And one thing that I'm thankful for is my parents always kind of had this rule where if my homework is done and it's done well, I can play video games. And they never had a timer on the video games. And honestly, sometimes I would play basketball, or I would, get involved in sports or social activities. But video games were there, the Super Nintendo and the Mortal Kombats and the NBA Jams and the Mario Karts. And then eventually KOTOR and SWOTOR and, games that became a professional identity too.
I've never understood where two people may get together and start a relationship, and all of a sudden people are there saying, well, you're in a relationship now, mate. You can't go and play your Xbox on a night time. You've got to spend your time with your girlfriend or with your wife or whatever. Well, absolutely not. I have always been a firm believer that you should be able to have time together, yes, but equally you must also be open to having time to do your own thing as well. And when you look at a relationship, you'll have seen so many situations where both people in the relationship or both people in the friendships like the exact same stuff time and time and time and time again. Same music, same food, same movies, same hobbies, same interests, and it just doesn't work because you're literally living in each other's back pockets constantly then, and you're not actually getting anything valuable out of that relationship. You should be able to do it where you may go to work, you come home at 5 o'clock, you sit down and have your dinner, and then you might spend a couple of hours together. Your partner might say to you, do you know what? I'm off to bed for the night. I'm going to watch my soaps. I'm going to watch my Netflix stuff on my iPad for a few hours. You could do your own thing. And that in itself can work. You've got to respect that you've got individual boundaries there, but you've got to understand that you can't expect to live in each other's pockets 24/7 because it's just going to drive you nuts.
Yeah, that would be a very frustrating boundary situation. We would maybe call that enmeshment, and that's not a great sustainable relationship pattern. So definitely can see that.
Yeah. Kitty, thank you for the raid, by the way. We are actually just about to wrap stream up. We've gone through quite a lot over the last 2.25 hours. I think we've pretty much covered all the areas really that we wanted to talk about, didn't we, Doc?
I'm sorry. I'm tickled by this Resident Evil comment in the chat.
You think Resident Evil to help you in anatomy or never? Never was decapitation more with chainsaw more educational. That's definitely accurate. Definitely accurate.
Yeah, yeah, definitely can relate to. Yeah, that's what we'll say. I let them continue to do that to me so I could learn placement of the bones in the neck.
Absolutely. And just how rugged you have to hit them in the jugular with the chainsaw before it'll actually spurt blood.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap stream up for tonight, guys. What I think would be a great idea is for us to maybe gather a bit of feedback at some point on tonight's stream as well. People can send me whispers on Twitch, or they can send me a DM on Discord, send me a DM on Twitter as well if need be. Give us a bit of feedback. I'm sure Doc would appreciate the same as well. And if we gauge enough interest in the future at some point, then we can always revisit this.
Oh, sure. I think that would be great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, Doc. So I'm gonna wrap stream up, and what we'll do is we're gonna go raid. We're going to go raid JJ, guys. It's been a while since we've gone in and raided him. So we'll go in. He's getting up to some stuff in Call of Duty, which is absolutely abhorrent with violence, and we should never be promoting aggressive and violent behaviours in the mental health community. But hey ho, thank you very much for dropping by, guys. And Doc, thank you so much for dropping by and spending your time with us tonight. That's really appreciated, mate.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Continue the journey.
Take it easy. No. I don't believe it. I don't fucking believe it. He's just finished.